as I wanted to mention that Michael, you talked about stuff that led on this early on, and then Dave talked about stuff that was tied on to creation, and then the other day, Jared gave a sermon on this idea. So I said, there's a hint here. So first thing I'm going to show you is just the talk from Dave's talk last month. He ended with, he quoted this part. He quoted a guy by the name of Robert Jastrow. He said, at this moment it seems as though science will never be able to raise the curtain on the mystery of creation. For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who've been sitting there for centuries. Love that, the problem with science. They struggle around and they look at it, and they're trying so hard not to involve anything that relates to the divine. And it leads them to trouble. So here's a quick overview from our point of view from the new church, from new church thinking. The spiritual and natural worlds are so distinct that they each need their own sons. That is what, we often talk about, the writings, what's so distinct about the new church? I mean, charity, other churches talk about charity, other churches talk about heaven, you ever heard any other church talk about a spiritual son and a natural son? Okay, and we'll follow through the argument of where it comes from. The idea is, just very generally I'll put it, that the Lord has to flow into something that's created and then withdraw from it. And then his energy can go into that created thing and then into people. It creates a separation. But I'll explain that more clearly in a moment. The next thing we need to know is the natural son is dead, but it corresponds to a spiritual and living son. We can conceive of this son being the son that the angels see in heaven. That it would be the spiritual son. Don't be confused. It's not just because they see it, and sometimes they see the Lord in it, the spiritual son is not the Lord. There's a difference. But that's the son that they see in the spiritual world, and it's a useful thing in terms of creation, which is our main theme. So, as it says in the writings, divine love and wisdom, the natural son was created so that all natural things may be fixed, settled, and constant, and that there may be forms of existence which shall be permanent and durable. These forms are the foundation of creation. We sometimes talk about how creation goes from firsts, the highest things, the divine, into the lasts. Energy, life flows into the last, which means the ultimates, the things of nature, the carbon atoms that you're made up of, and then it comes in and thence into intermediates, which is the human mind. From first to last, and then into intermediates. But it couldn't just go into intermediates. You can't build a house by building the roof. You have to build a foundation and then build up from that. And so in the same way with creation, you have to build something that will be fixed and durable and essentially dead, on which you can build something that lives. So that's the concept we're working with here. Let me just read a couple numbers here. I'm not going to do a lot of them, but these are key. In Divine Love and Wisdom 153, there are two sons through which all things were created by the Lord. The son of the spiritual world and the son of the natural world. All things were created by the Lord through the son of the spiritual world, but not through the son of the natural world, since the latter is far below the former. And it goes on to say in 154, the universe, am I too loud? Use the condenser. Wait, that's all the way down. Here's dynamic. Better? 154. The universe and all things thereof were created by the Lord, the Son of the spiritual world serving as a medium or a means, because that Son is the first proceeding of divine love and divine wisdom, and from divine love and divine wisdom, all things are. Okay, that's kind of airy-fairy, right? I'll make it more concrete in a minute. But again, we also want to talk about things like the purpose of creation. And the purpose of creation is why in the world do we have the creation at all? And it comes down to the three rules that you find about what true love is, which are in True Christian Religion 42 and 43, among other places, which says there are three essentials to true love. One is you have to love someone outside yourself. You have to want to be conjoined with that thing, that person, and you want to make that thing or person happy from yourself. That's the essence of true love. You can use that to judge a marriage, you could judge a friendship, any kind of relationship. Those three rules apply. And now try and picture God before creation. He is love itself, and yet he can't be conjoined to anyone, and he can't make anyone happy because they don't exist yet. So his purpose in having a creation is so that there would be people that he could make happy. He could be with and could make happy, so they come back. So in order for there to be a creation, there must be subjects, like us, capable of receiving the Creator's love and wisdom as of themselves, and not only just receive it, because you can love a goldfish, but it's not going to respond to you much. Now, I do know that some people have goldfish that are quite intelligent, and when you walk into the room at a certain time of day, they'll come to the side of the tank because they think they're going to be fed. But that's not the kind of relationship we're really looking for. The point was that by having this influx and having this leadership from the Lord, that we can rise up above ourselves and rise up into heaven. So people are these subjects, and they are the recipients of the divine in themselves. And this whole issue is one of the big questions. We talk about different Eastern religions where it talks about the goal is, we've been separated from God, and our goal is to return to God and become part of God. That's one of the ways that some people think of this kind of thing, that we're separated from God and we need to return to Him, and somehow our happiness is key to being a part of this divine. But the difficulty becomes, how can we be happy if we lose our identity? What happens if we get absorbed back into some divine consciousness? That doesn't seem like a very good idea. I like being a person. I'm used to it. So the idea is, how can we be connected to the divine? How can we somehow receive the divine in our bodies and have life and know that our life is a gift from the divine, and at the same time not be connected to the divine and just being a fragment of God somehow and being that part? Because, how would you explain evil then? If we're all part of God and we're just His little extensions out there, how could there possibly be evil? So, how can we be independent, free-thinking, and free-willing people if we're conjoined with God? And how could we possibly live if we're not conjoined? So that becomes the big issue, the question. Now, I would like to say, for a very complete and clear discussion of this, get a copy of Jared's sermon from October 21st. It was really good. It talked about this a lot, and I was sitting there thinking, okay, that's it. Just read that, and I don't have to talk about it in my talk. But it looks like we're working on a theme here, I think, between the talk, the sermon that Jared gave, and the talk that Michael gave, and the thing that Dave gave. We're working on a theme here. It's not a conspiracy. It's divine providence. So, carrying on with my point here, having given that little commercial. Wake up. I want to try and illustrate this idea of how the divine can influence us and make us living human beings and fill us with joy and life, and at the same time, we can be distinct human individuals with free will. And our greatest happiness actually comes through this whole thing, through being permitted to take part in the process of new life. Being married and having kids and making kids is actually, by correspondence, a picture of this. The divine wisdom represented by the husband, the divine love represented by the wife. They come together. There's a plan, there's a desire. They come together. And what results from that? New life. creation of new life. And why is this particular act so joyful and so important to everybody? It's because it mirrors, the Lord has given it to us as a gift representing his own act of creating the human race and creating the whole world. So that's why it's so important. These two things come together. So, must have battery trouble. In marriage, we see the image and likeness of creation of the universe itself. We see the marriage of good and truth. And in creating new life, we feel, by correspondence, the joy of the Lord himself that he felt when he at last had subjects capable of freely returning his love. And thinking about that, new life, a fetus, if you think about this, a child in the womb is not at one with the mother. It's a totally separate individual, and it is completely distinct. A mother and a child can have different blood types, but if you're in an emergency room and you have type A blood and they give you type B blood, you're going to die. But a mother can carry a baby, she can be a type A and carry a baby with type B, and it's fine because they are completely distinct. Organ transplants don't work between mother and child necessarily. So, and we might wonder also, how is it possible, if we do an organ transplant, we stick a kidney in somebody, unless you put in really powerful drugs to control the rejection, the body's going to reject that. How is it possible that an entirely different human being can be inside of you and your immune system doesn't attack it? This becomes the question. You see where I'm going with this? The divine, the life on one hand, how can it be distinct from the life that's within it? And the answer in the case of the human body is the placenta. And here's just a quick picture of one just to remind you what it is. I'm sure you're all familiar generally. But what it does is it creates, there's a barrier here. One side is mom, and one side is the kid. And in there, the blood vessels run next to each other, but they don't touch each other. And the nutrients and the oxygen and the carbon dioxide and all that stuff pass back and forth through these membrane walls and yet remain distinct. Most amazing thing. I'm going to read something from Gray's Anatomy about what this is doing. Be prepared to be amazed. I'll show it for you. The fetal and material blood currents traverse the placenta, the former passing through the blood vessels of the placental villi and the latter through the intervillous space. The two currents do not intermingle, being separated from each other by the delicate walls of the villi. Nevertheless, the fetal blood is able to absorb through the walls of the villi oxygen and nutritive materials from the maternal blood, and to give up the latter, to the latter its waste products. The blood so purified is carried back to the fetus by the umbilical cord or the umbilical vein. Okay, that's there for when I'm talking to this subject about ladies. For the guys, same thing. Out in the hydro field out there are cables running by that have 50,000 volts in them, coming up from the station, wherever they were manufactured. To get into the house, or get into here, where it comes down to 110 volts, or 115, whatever it is here, it has to go through a series of transformers, where a large number of volts comes in one side, and a smaller number goes out the other side that's more useful. It's exactly what's happening with the thing. Alternating current does a wonderful thing. When current flows around a piece of iron, alternating current, it causes, by the left-hand rule of thumb, the wires go around and the voltage goes up. Wires go down, it goes like this. So what happens is, here's 50,000 volts coming in here. It goes around, it's AC, so it goes in and out, in and out. And what it does is, here's this nice big dead chunk of iron. It's just a chunk of iron. There's nothing magic about it. But what happens is, the AC current coming in here generates a response in this. So the current flows back and forth in here. And what ends up happening is, now you have over the other side, you have these other wires. And as the current flows back and forth through the iron, these wires pick it up and send it out. And you can do the math. The reduction is exactly the same number of windings here to this. So if there's 20 windings over here and 10 windings here, the voltage is reduced by half. Okay? So what you have is all this energy coming in here, and this big dead thing receiving it, and other electricity going out here. Those wires are not connected to those wires. There's no connectivity. And yet, life or electricity comes out of them. Okay? So, for the engineers, you put electricity in one side, you get modified or reduced voltage out the other side, but there's no connection between the sets of wires. Okay? Do you see where I'm going with this? You see we're talking about the spiritual sun? Okay?
Jim, clarification.
Yes?
The wound wires don't actually make physical contact?
No, they don't.
Okay.
Actually, they don't. They're insulation.
Okay.
Now, that would be a key point, that there's, it's not like it's connected because that's iron. These are actually insulated wires. Often in an actual transformer, you'd see them. They look bare, but they actually have a lacquer coating on them to make it look, it wants to be very thin. So they have a special paint that they put on when they wrap a transformer. And in an actual transformer, there'd be like 10,000 loops here and, 5,000 on this side to get the pickup. But they're using that very thin copper wire with a lacquer on it. It is insulated. So there's no magic here. Yeah, it goes magnetic. Magnetic impulse works both ways. An alternating current can create a magnetic impulse, and a magnetic impulse can create an alternating current. So they take advantage of that. So here's another way of illustrating it. You have divine life into the spiritual sun, everything in creation. Or the mom, the placenta, the child. High voltage, iron core, useful electricity. Again, something dead, but what it does is it connects the higher thing to the lower thing in a way that it provides the life, and yet it steps back from it in such a way that the thing being enlivened is still free. It's really cool. There are other illustrations, of course. So what's the point of this part of it? Is God is not connected or conjoined to us. We are not part of some cosmic oneness. We are separate and distinct beings. Well, this leads to a separate but related question again about creation, which is this. Hang on. There's some extra points on there. At the same time, he's constantly inflowing, and there's this phrase that it's kind of fun. Not by continuity, but by contiguity, conjectivity comes. In other words, we're not connected, but it's things abutting on something else. All right. Now the other big question about creation is, where did it come from? Where did the stuff come from? And we're sitting here saying, okay, well, the Lord, in the writings, what it says is the Lord created the universe from himself and not from nothing. Little story. A young boy asks his guru, how does the earth ride through the heavens? And the great guru answers, well, my son, it rides on the back of a great turtle. And the son thinks about it for a little while and says, oh, guru, on what does the turtle walk? And the guru responds, well, my son, he responds on the back of another great turtle. And of course, then the kid says, well, on who does that one walk? And the guru says, look, kid, it's turtles all the way. In other words, we're not going to answer that question. We don't know where it all comes from. The turtles are walking on something, but we don't know what. So it's turtles all the way. Okay? So this leads to the question of the origin of the universe, which is, we're talking about the universe. So it's a big question by definition. It's a big topic. And the question is, the question of the nature of the universe and our place has been discussed since earliest times. People just want to know, well, where do we come from? Kids want to know where they came from. And we look around and say, well, where did this all come from? And people want to know, they dig around the ground and they see the dinosaurs and they want to know. But we've got, in the 20th and 21st century, we've had some physicists talking about things like the Big Bang Theory. There's even a TV show about it. Not really about this, but it's fun because they're physicists. And the idea is that somehow we go back to the beginning of time, and the beginning of matter and how the beginning of energy and how it was all formed and things cooled down from that initial explosion. So they take the idea that there was this big explosion sometime at the beginning of time, and you don't really have to, I don't really want to get into it, but there are all these things about, this is the point where gravity's formed and the first protons are formed here, and eventually we get down here and it's like 30 billion years to get out the point where the planets and everything forms. But basically it comes from this, point of unity where everything in the universe was compressed to something the size of a baseball. And that's what they say. Now it explodes and off it goes. Now, I'm happy that the idea that people can look back, and this is scientific observation. People have realized that light does things, and they get these telescopes, and they look back in time. And of course, the further out they look into the universe, you're actually looking back in time, because you're looking at things that happened a long time ago. The light's just getting to us now, but these are things the light has traveled over hundreds of millions of light years, which means we're looking into the past. And they measure temperatures, and they do all kinds of really cool stuff. And they have, I think this probably is a pretty good explanation of what, in fact, did happen after some kind of creative moment in the universe. I'm quite happy with it. But the theory requires that there's some kind of stuff, something that existed before the Big Bang. So even scientists will say, okay, where did the stuff come from? So you've got some kind of material substance that's affected by gravity. Oh, wait a minute. Gravity was created in about the 4th microsecond after the... But somehow there's stuff out there, and gravity brings it all together, and as it gets closer, of course, the gravity has a bigger effect, and it goes faster and faster and faster and faster until the material condenses into this one spot and finally just erupts out. That's the idea. So all material falls into one center with sufficient speed and force. Okay, now we've got material, and we've got gravity before creation. Okay, turtles. And then finally, it reaches infinite mass and infinite temperature and explodes. Okay. So we go back to the picture again. There's the explosion. Time begins with the Big Bang. But in order for it to happen, there must have been things that happened before time, which is a logical inconsistency.
And in sequential order, too.
Yeah. There has to be some kind of order. Okay, so wait a minute. First of all, where did that stuff come from? So, physicists will tell you, Stephen Hawking, well, you see, there was a universe before ours. You're jumping ahead of me. There was a universe before ours, you see, and it was a closed universe, so it reached a certain point where it stopped expanding and then fell back into itself and condensed and went through a black hole and came out the other side, and that's us. And you go, okay, so the negative universe went through the black hole and came out, and that's us. Well, where did that one come from? Where did well, see, there was a previous universe. In other words, ready, everyone? It's turtles all the way. They haven't solved the problem. Science is not prepared to tell us where the stuff comes from. They can't. It was just there. They report, this is another thing that's kind of interesting, they report but are mystified by the observation that hydrogen atoms apparently appear in a regular, measurable rate in the vacuum of space. New ones. They measure, they go up to the space station, and suddenly there's more hydrogen atoms than they can account for. They're counting them. They're just appearing there. What's that phrase we were talking about earlier? That creation is a constant thing? Perpetual coming into being. That's another thing. That's where the animals just sort of, that's where insects arrive, like, the gnats that arrive in your kitchen. No. They're a little bit more. Bunnies. So anyhow, hydrogen, this is a scientific fact. They have measured this. They can't explain it, but it happens. So, but our minds rebel at the idea of something coming from nothing. So here you got a whole bunch of nothing, and now the universe comes from it. It doesn't make sense. So science doesn't have a better answer. So what does it do? It simply tries to avoid the whole question. So we come back to our friend Robert Jastrow. He says, consider the enormity of the problem. Dave, I got to thank you for this guy. I started looking him up after your talk last time, and there are just so many gems. Yeah, the guy's got his credentials. Yeah, he's got his cred. So he says, consider the enormity of the problem. Science has proved that the universe exploded into being at a certain moment. It asks, what cause produced this effect? Who or what put the matter or energy into the universe? And science cannot answer these questions because, according to the astronomers, in the first moments of its existence, the universe was compressed to an extraordinary degree and consumed by the heat of a fire beyond human imagination. The shock of that instant must have destroyed every particle of evidence that could have yielded a clue to the cause of the great explosion. Okay. The answer's right in front of them. We all know this one. Bingo. You all know that, right? Energy is equal to the mass of something multiplied by the speed of light squared. Speed of light's a big number. 180,000 miles per second squared. So that's why we get, if we try and take matter and convert it into energy, we tend to get a lot of it. Okay? So we have demonstrated the truth of that equation. Okay? That you can take matter and, under the correct circumstances, create enormous amounts of energy from it by converting it into energy. Okay? But since we know that equations can go both ways, that also means that energy can be converted into matter. And that's also been demonstrated. They have, it's very difficult to do. They use the big colliders that they have in Switzerland and so forth. They are able to do this kind of things where they fuse things together and using a tremendous amount of energy are able to create matter under certain circumstances. It's extremely difficult, but it's true. Yes?
It's also extremely simple. Every leaf, every blade of grass does it every day.
Well, that's right. There's photosynthesis, which is kind of cool, which takes sunshine.
It takes energy, converts
Yeah.
light energy, converts
Right.
it to matter.
Right, in the presence of the right things. Again, that's a very good example of how this works. Energy can be converted into matter. All those leaves that I'm raking were once sunshine. So, that we now ask the question, what do we have that might pre-exist the Big Bang and also be defined as pure energy? Turtles, rabbits.
Divine love.
Divine love, there we go.
I should say divine love and wisdom.
Divine love and wisdom, yeah. Or we can go with God, that works. But there's the idea, here we're, well, God is pure energy. He's, and we talk about all these different things. Comes up that way. Every religion recognizes that God has power. And here we have something that is pure energy that pre-exists creation. Where did it come from? God created the universe from himself and not from nothing. The energy of God was turned into material by means of power from the Lord. He created the spiritual sun, this is a quoting from Divine Love and Wisdom, and then withdrew from it. He creates and withdraws. Now there's an object that's distinct from himself, and then he can flow into it, and that energy then can flow, is now moderated like the transformer, like the placenta. That energy now can flow into the objects of creation. So as a transformer stands between the hydro and a household current, or a placenta stands between the mother and the child, the spiritual son stands between the creator and the created. So winding this up, here's a passage from Divine Love and Wisdom. Everyone who thinks from clear reason sees also that all things have been created out of a substance that is substance in itself. For that is esse, or being itself, out of which everything that is can take form. And since God alone is substance in itself, and therefore being, or esse, in itself, it's evident that from this source alone is the formation of things. A couple more. The visible things in the created universe bear witness that nature has produced and does produce nothing, but that the divine, out of itself and through the spiritual world, has produced and does produce all things. But those who confirm themselves in the idea that the sun produces the things that appear upon earth by means of its heat and light, end by ascribing all things to nature, even the creation of the universe, and become naturalists and at last atheists. These may continue to say that God created nature and endowed her with the power of producing such things, but this they say from fear of losing their good name. And by God, the Creator, they still mean nature, and some mean the innermost of nature, and then the divine things taught by the church they regard as of no account. Anyone can see who chooses, or anyone who chooses may confirm himself in favor of the divine from things seen in nature. And whoever thinks about God in reference to life does so confirm himself, as when he observes the birds of the air, how each species knows its food and where to find it, recognizes its kind by sound and sight, in which, among other kinds, its friends, and which its enemies, how also they mate, have knowledge of the sexual relation, skillfully build nests, lay eggs therein, sit upon these, know the period of incubation, and this having elapsed, bring forth their young, love them most tenderly, cherish them under their wings, bring them from food and feed them until they can do for themselves, perform the same offices, and bring forth a family to perpetuate their kind. You know, that just reminded me of something. It's all very well to say that about things like, birds, which we can observe. But back in the olden days when I was in college, I was taking a course in genetics. And the professor would throw up a picture of a cell and say, okay, now here's a picture of a cell, and here are the organelles within the cell. And when the cell starts, when the DNA starts to unravel, and the spiral begins to unravel, what happens is it unzips, and then what they call little molecules called transfer RNA catch on to the right thing to link it on, and they come, the cytosine or the thymine or whatever it is, comes over and links onto it, and they sort of unzip, and these little motorboats go zooming around in the cell, bringing the right molecules to meet two strips so the cell can then divide. So being the annoying person I was, I'm sitting there in class listening, I say, how does that tRNA move? Where's its motor? And the professor looked at me and said, huh? I said, it's moving around in the protoplasm through the cell. Obviously, it sits there by itself for a while, and then suddenly, out of the blue, it suddenly motors over and picks up a molecule, and then takes it to the right place and hooks it on there. How does it know? And poor guy was startled. He didn't know. I said, there's all kinds of stuff going on at the cellular level of molecules apparently just moving around by themselves and doing highly refined jobs when they're needed and not when they don't. They don't do it all the time. They only do it when it's needed. So, and he finally said, Cooper, be quiet. We need to move on. He couldn't deal with it. But again, this happening, we're watching the birds, whatever. How do they know? I passed. I was okay.
And where was it, Jim?
At the University of Arizona.
It's more of a PhD level question.
Yeah.
Because that's the kind of thing they research. Well, how does it know and how does it?
Yeah, well, they were, why are you asking that question? It just does. It's turtles all the way.
Well, so much of science is, well, it just is, or it just does.
Yeah, and I tended to call it on them, but it was interesting. But again, these are the kind of things that people just, oh yeah, it just happens. They don't stop to think why or how, and it's important. So, anyone who is willing to reflect on the divine influx through the spiritual world into the natural can see such influx in these things, if he will, can say from his heart, such knowledges cannot flow into these creatures out of the sun through its rays of light, for the sun from which nature derives its origin and essence is mere fire. Consequently, its rays of light are wholly dead, and thus he may conclude that such things are from the influx of divine wisdom into the outmost of nature. And I think sometimes, I remember when I was the president of a radio control club, we'd be there with all these little kids, and we'd be standing there, and I'd be flying an airplane, model airplane. And as soon as the plane took off, now the kids knew that I was holding a box in my hand and I was flying it from there. They knew that. They watched me do it. And as soon as the plane took off and was flying around and doing loop-de-loops and whatever I was doing with it, they immediately transferred their thought and said, wow, that plane's doing this, it's doing that. They immediately assumed that the controlling force or the intelligence that operated that was in the airplane, when in fact they could see that I was operating it. That sort of answers all these questions. How do butterflies figure out how to get from Toronto to Costa Rica and back again through 4 generations? How do they pass that? None of the butterflies actually make the whole trip, and yet they pass it on. And if we worry about how much information is going to be in a butterfly's head, maybe we need to realize that actually all they need is a radio receiver and get instructions from the Lord. He's just flying his radio-controlled butterflies. Yeah. So, my conclusion here, to bring it to an appropriate end. Science is great. I love science. I studied a lot of science when I was in college. I've continued to read it. I love science fiction. I really like the whole way of thinking logically and observing and drawing conclusions and testing them, making theories. And science really, its job is to attempt to explain how things work. What religion does is talk about why things are. We shouldn't confuse the two. We don't go to the Bible to figure out how to build a steam engine. That's not what it's for. It's not to explain the natural world, as my wife tells the kindergartners. When she taught kindergarten, now she tells first and second. She says, the Lord made us very smart. He knew that we would be able to figure out most things. He knew that we'd make a wheel and turn it into a cart and learn how to harvest different fruits and vegetables. He knows that we could do that. What he realized that there'd be some things that we'd never be able to figure out on our own because we don't have the tools to tune in to spiritual things. Those are the things that he put in the Word. Things about morality and spiritual life. The things that we need to know about the life of the Spirit are what are in the Bible. The things about God, the things that we would not be able to figure out on our own. What we find, and then he says, and the rest of the world's you're to play with. Figure it out. Have fun. But when it comes to the spiritual things in your spiritual life, here's what you need to know. So, religion tells us why, tells us about spiritual things. Science talks about the natural things and how they work. And the bottom line is, we need both to have a complete understanding about the way the world works. We can't get by on one or the other. They need to work hand in hand. I'm done.